Hey guys, Lytane here, and games used to be really difficult. You know, that NES kind of hard, where games just used to be tough for the sake of being tough. That's just how they were. But since then, now we have things like easy mode and tutorials, and games have become a lot more accessible for people because of that fact, which is good, and I believe it's great. But every so often, a game comes out that is tough as nails. And I'm going to be talking about one of the more famous ones in recent memory, Dark Souls, and seeing if it's worth it. Dark Souls was released in 2011, made by the company From Software. This is the first game in the Dark Souls series, but it's considered the second game in the Souls series. A game called Demon Souls was the first to be released, and it is very different in story and scope, but a lot of the gameplay and elements are similar enough. Aside from those similarities, Dark Souls is a very different and unique game. The story for Dark Souls is also a little bit up to interpretation, as the lore is really deep, but also very vague. Here is a brief outline for it. A long time ago, the world was shrouded in fog and ruled by dragons until the first flame was born, and with it, souls. The first beings to find the fire took up the power from it, creating the Lord Souls. They were Gravelord Nito, the Witch of Izalith, and Gwendolyn, with the last of its power taken by the Pygmy, with humanity being born from it. The gods used these new powers to fight the dragons, and they won, creating a new order and land ruled by them and the fire. But it was not to last, as fires die out and the first flame started dwindling. Gwyn became obsessed and afraid and didn't want to lose his empire or let it fall into darkness, so he sacrificed himself to keep the fire burning. Turns out as this is just a quick fix though, as the flame doesn't last forever and it needs to be rekindled again. And now that all rests upon you, the chosen undead who has to escape from the asylum and explore the world in order to become strong enough to get to that first flame and rekindle it. Or do you snuff it out? Whatever you decide, just remember that you need to prepare to die. Dark Souls is a very popular game and so well known for its difficulty, so much so that every game that has come out afterwards gets compared to Dark Souls. That really does annoy me. Like when Crash Bandicoot came out for the remastered edition, they said it was the Dark Souls of platforming, and I'm like, Crash Bandicoot didn't really change much from the original to the remaster, aside from graphics and a few of the gameplay elements, but for the most part it was the same. And Crash Bandicoot came out 10 years before this game, so I'm not seeing why they compare a game that came out before Dark Souls and then saying, oh, it's as hard as Dark Souls. Really, Dark Souls should be Crash Bandicoot hard. Plus there's other hard games that are out, like Contra, or anything really on the NES or Super NES, like Ghosts and Goblins. Why does no one say, oh man, that was Ghosts and Goblins hard? It's just something that really annoys me, that everything gets compared to Dark Souls because it was the hardest game around for a time. But honestly, there were so many hard games before, during, and since, but they just all get compared to Dark Souls. So that's a bit of a negative stigma in my opinion, because the game is tough as nails, sure, but it's not deserving of this everything has to be compared to it in terms of difficulty. With that rant over, let's get into the actual game. You will start by picking a character and a starting item, with the master key being pretty helpful and the pendant being the best item in the game. From there, you have starting stats, which aren't too important, as you can build your character how you want afterwards. Then you are off in this strange world with minimal tutorials that you aren't forced to read, and the game starts off in a very comfortable way. It slowly starts showing you some of the enemies that don't fight back, so you can learn the controls and how to attack, and then some that do attack very weakly and slowly, so you can get a feel for the combat and the systems. Honestly, the start of this game is so well done with how everything is presented to you and how it slowly gets you into the core mechanics of the game. This is thrown way out of the window though when you're attacked by the very first boss of the game about 5 minutes in, the Asylum Demon, and this thing will obliterate you. You don't have any armor or a good weapon yet, and this thing deals massive damage and it is most likely going to kill you. This is a very important lesson to learn. You are a small and weak individual and you will die in this game, so get used to it. From there, you have to run away from this demon. Sure, you can try and kill it, but you'll be dealing so little damage that most people won't even try. So you'll run away, and then doing so teaches you another important lesson, that not all bad guys can be killed straight away. From there, you'll discover some better gear, some more bad guys, level up a little bit, and get some new weapons. all of which will make you stronger. Now, when you come back around to fight the Asylum Demon again, you come at it from a different angle. Now, instead of being in front of it when it jumps down and tries to kill you, you're on top of it, so you can jump down on top of it and deal massive damage to it before the fight actually begins. This is another important lesson to teach you, because it shows you that multiple enemies have different ideas around them and that you can go at it a different way. You don't always have to go head on trying to kill something. Sometimes there's a better way, and this in turns strategy. This is so important, and none of this is shown with on-screen tutorials or any text or anything. This is shown by you actually doing it, and I think that is such a great way in a video game to teach a player. Now that you know that if you have better gear and you come at it with a different idea or different strategy, there's a better chance that you will win. In order to beat this game, you have to, as the Dark Souls community says, get good. That's it. You have to learn the mechanics of the game. You have to learn how your character moves, how your character interacts with the world. You have a dodge mechanic which has a few frames of invincibility. You have attacking animations that have varying speeds and varying damage. You have to learn all of these mechanics, and you have to get good at them in order to overcome all of the things that this game will have to throw at you, which I think is a good idea. You have to become wise and everything. You can't just plow your way through or guess your way through the game. You have to get good. The main focus of the game is actually a fairly open world to the player. You are given a vague task of ringing some bells from the start, and that's about it. Go and have fun in this evil world. I'm sure nothing bad will happen. Starting at Firelink Shrine, which is sort of a hub, you can explore and find some cool weapons that are laying around, and just some random items and stuff, and some NPCs to talk to, which give a little bit more lore and backstory to what's happening around you. And of course, you'll also find some hard as nails enemies that will kill you. Like I said, get used to dying. You are meant to go to the village first off, but you could explore that graveyard where the harder enemies are. But when you die, you realize that you can't go that way because you're not strong enough, so then you try a different path. This forces exploration onto the character, so you need to figure out where to go. So as you find a new area, each one of them has a very different feel to them, and a little bit of the game is linear, going from one area to another, but it's not that linear. It's actually very, very complex. But I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here. You'll be exploring these levels and taking down enemies which get stronger as the game goes on. Your only safety is finding the bonfires that are littered around the world. They let you rest, level up your stats among other things, and they also act as a checkpoint if you should die. But one thing that these bonfires do is that they respawn all of the enemies that you killed when you rest. So if you ran forward, killed two skeletons, came back and rested, those two skeletons come back alive, which means you can't slowly go through the game and destroy everything along your path. You have to get good and be able to get from one bonfire to another one, because those are your only checkpoints. All of the enemies that are in between them will respawn. Well, most of the enemies. The bosses don't respawn, and there are certain enemies that will not come back once killed, but for the majority of it, they will be coming back. This is a daunting experience because you have limited healing items as well, so you won't be going through like a god. And because these checkpoints are hidden in the world, you have to find them as well. So you could walk past a bonfire without even knowing it was there, and not knowing that you could have, got to that checkpoint, then you die and you go even further back. It is a little bit frustrating, and which is part of the reason why this game is considered hard. But nothing is harder than the bosses of the game. They are the highlight of the game in my opinion, because they are all unique and they have to be handled differently. You have to figure out the best way to fight them and to kill them, learning their attacks and how to avoid, with the first bosses being a good testing point to the player and the later ones just being absolutely hard to kill until you learn the main thing about this game. You have to memorize patterns and get good at reacting to what the game throws at you. You have to remember that an enemy was behind that wall, so the next time you walk through, it won't just come out and attack you off guard. You need to remember that the boss does this move and then you can dodge in this direction, because if you don't remember, you will get hit and possibly die. You will remember that the world is all connected, and then you need to remember how it's connected if you want to get from one area to another, or to use the shortcuts that are littered around the game. Honestly, the depth of this game is absolutely ridiculous. Everything in this game has some depth to it. The combat is not just a press a button and you attack. You have a heavy attack and a light attack, and both use different amounts of stamina. Stamina is the energy resource that you will need to do anything pretty much in this game. You want to run, use a stamina. You want to dodge roll, use a stamina. You want to attack, it uses stamina. And then when it runs out, you can't do anything. Because of this, if you are just attacking, willy-nilly, and then you run out of stamina and then they do an attack on you, you can't dodge. Now you have to micromanage your stamina whilst you're attacking and whilst you're dodging. It's so many things to take care of, and that's just the combat, that's just attacking and defending. When you equip different weapons, they have different animations, they have different strengths and weaknesses, and they do different things. You can also wield with one hand or two hands. Then you have armor, which has weight. The more armor you put on, the heavier your character, the less damage you take. That's great. But now you can't dodge as fast because your armor is heavy. It makes sense. Even something like poise, which is how many attacks to stagger you, changes about how much armor you are wearing. So if you're wearing nothing, then the slightest hit could stagger you. Whilst if you're wearing like the big heavy armors in the late game, a slight hit will just brush off you. It doesn't do anything. All of this depth is there, and it is so complex. Even how the stats work on each of your items, like upping your dexterity changes whole different amounts of stats and which weapons work better for you. It's just so much. It's so much and so complicated, but it also leads to so many people figuring it all out and then being masters at it. And those people are great. I'm definitely not one of them, that's for sure. But the best thing, in my opinion, about this game is the world that you explore. There are so many unique locations and areas to visit, but what makes it stand out is the design of the game. From Firelink Shrine, you can see one of the later areas of the game, but you don't know that it's a later area, and you don't know that you go there in your first time through. But when you play through a second time, you will see these areas off in the distance, and you're like, oh man, I remember that place. Oh wow, I can't believe I could see it from here. The world is all connected with so many shortcuts between areas, which makes the game feel much more alive. Honestly, this is perhaps the best designed world that I have ever played through in any video game. So much thought and preparation was put into the game, and it really shines through. Even though this game is hard, most of the time it's actually a fair kind of hard. Because the enemies always respawn in the same locations, you can memorize the patterns and where they are and how they attack, so that way you aren't as unprepared. The first time going through any area is scary because you don't know what to expect, but as you die and you go through the areas again and again, you do learn what to expect, and sometimes you can find shortcuts which get you past enemies, or maybe you understand that if you go up against a certain wall, they won't get aggro and attack you, stuff like that. Or sometimes you get a bow and arrow out and kill things from afar because it's easier. All of these things are there for you, the player, but if you don't realize these things, and if you don't do these things, it is hard. There are some cheap parts of this game as well, don't get me wrong. Like I said, there's some enemies that are hidden behind walls, so when you walk out of a doorway, it just rushes out and attacks you. That's cheap. Also, there's a spot in Analondo with two mofo archers that is the absolute bane of my existence. I hate them. If you've ever played this game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those guys are absolute assholes, and that isn't fair, because that whole section is not designed in a way that is fair. But for the most part, it is. Now, some of the bosses are also like overpowered and they do some crazy moves, which are a little bit not fair as well, but you can learn these attack patterns and you can get better at dodging them. In fact, this game is so well made that you can finish the whole game at level 1. It's difficult, don't get me wrong, but it is possible. It just means you have to hit the bad guys a lot more because you're so much weaker. But it's possible if you get good. The exception to the rule is Blighttown, which is a blight on human existence. I hate it so much. It is different from the rest of the game as well, because there's a lot of verticality to it and you have to memorize where you're going. There are fewer bonfires in this area, and the worst part is that it's full of poisonous stuff. There are guys that will sit off in the darkness that you cannot see, and they will be blowing poison darts at you, and if they hit you enough times, then you become poisoned. Now, you have to find these guys, kill them, or try and dodge their stupid spikes whilst also dodging all of the other bad guys that you'll be fighting in the area. To make things worse, because of its large scale, there's a lot of frame rate issues here, so there'll be a lot of slowdown and there'll be a lot of jarring things, which screws up the gameplay because now you can't do those pinpoint accurate dodges because the frames are all screwing up. Blighttown sucks. It's the worst area of the game, and no one ever wants to go there because it's so crap. Even though you will be dying a lot, all is not lost. You can pick up from the last bonfire with very minor punishments to you. You will be back where you last rested and all the enemies do respawn, but the biggest blow to you is that you lose all of your souls upon death. These are used for leveling up and buying stuff, repairing things, as well as many other things in the game, and you need lots of them, so dying causes all of them to drop out of you. This sucks, but they do give you a slight chance to get them back. If you can make it to the point where you died, then you can pick up all the souls that you dropped, which is a great idea. Die again, however, and they are all lost to you forever. So at least they give you some crumb of hope in this crazy game. Even though this is a solo experience, there is a multiplayer aspect to this game. As you're running around the different locations, a lot of scratch marks will be on the floor where people leave messages. The messages are words that you can set up in a string, so you can't just say like random things like penis or something like that. It has to be the words that they give you. Because of this, it can give you hints and tips and false hope, because some of the things are trolls or some of them are really good. So like you might be in front of a treasure chest and some of the treasure chests attack you. They're called mimics. And then on the floor in front of the treasure chest, some guy might have written mimic. So then you're like, oh, okay, I know this is a mimic, I'll attack this treasure chest. Some people also write like fake wall or bonfire ahead to help people in the right direction. These are all optional reads as well, which is really cool. Also through the game, you'll be seeing blood splatters on the floor, and if you press the button, you get to see that person just before their death. So you can see what they were doing, and you can get little hints as well as to what they were fighting against or what they were doing, so you can avoid that on your playthrough. Also, there is a PvP mode when you're going through the game. You can be invaded by other people, or you can go into other people's worlds and try and kill them. This only happens if you use humanity, which is an item in the game which boosts all of your stats and makes you stronger, makes you better, it's all great. But the risk is that now you can be invaded. The PvP system in this game is really, really well done, and due to all those armors and all those weapons and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of depth and variety to people. Some people try to challenge themselves, wear nothing and then wear a stupid sword that will deal a lot of damage, or some people wear really heavy armor and all that kind of stuff. There's so much depth here, but I'm not particularly good at the PvP, so it's not my favorite area of the game because I live in Australia and I have a laggy internet, so many times I'll hit somebody, they'll just dodge out of the way. It'll go through them, but it doesn't connect. I'll be standing like all the way over here and then boom, I get hit by a sword blow. It's crap and I don't particularly like it, but a lot of people do, and I can see the worth in it. The player interaction doesn't end there though. You can also summon other people to help you out. If you are in an area where you have yet to kill the boss, you can go up to a summon sign on the floor and bring somebody to your world. They will help you get to the boss or even to fight the boss. That's a common thing because these bosses are difficult, and if you summon people, the bosses get more health, but now you have two people to attack it. So you know, it's usually easier to defeat them when you have somebody that is a better level and better equipment than you. Because of this, the game has like not an easier mode per se, but it does allow you to have an easier time with some of the interactions. You can summon someone at the beginning of a new area, they can help you get through it all, and which is, you know, fantastic, and then defeat the boss, which makes the game slightly easier, though it's still difficult. The only thing about the PvP experience that really pisses me off is that they can invade you when you're in the middle of exploring an area. Only killing the enemy that invaded you, or leaving the area, or killing the boss will get them to go away, and sometimes you could be so far into an area when you get invaded only to be killed. To prevent this though, you don't use humanity, that item I talked about earlier. If you don't consume humanity, people can't come in and PvP you. So it's a little bit of a mixed thing. Do you go for better stats and then an easier time, but with the risk of someone coming in and invading you? Or do you go for less stats, which makes it a little bit harder to get through, but you don't run the risk of being invaded? Even though the game is open and a lot of the things that you can do is up to you, you can do them in a lot of different orders, the main idea is to get to that last bonfire and make a choice. This game has a few different endings, which is good, and then upon completing the game, you are rewarded with a new game plus mode, which is the exact same game, but nearly everything is harder. The enemies are harder, the bosses are harder, with more health and more stronger hitting attacks. But everything that you had with you is still with you. You still have those best weapons and armors in the game that you had at the end of the game, and now you have it at the start. So now you can kill that asylum demon when he comes down at you instead of dying, which feels so satisfying. It's still pretty fun to go through the game a second time, being that more powerful, and if you want 100% the game and get the platinum or whatever, then you will have to play through the game a few more times. There is so much to talk about here with Dark Souls, so many mechanics, so many ideas, so many things that just the game did right and the game did wrong, but I can't talk about it forever, so I'm just going to give my final opinion. In my opinion, Dark Souls is worth it. It is such an amazing game. The gameplay is so much fun, the combat is so deep and so good to use that when you get a grasp on it, that you just feel so powerful. When you start getting some of the better weapons of the game and you find a weapon tree that you like the style of, so like scimitars or long swords, and you stick with them, you get better at using them, and then you get better at killing the enemies. Because of this hard element to the game where you'll be fighting through and dying a lot, when you finally reach the next bonfire, it is a huge reward. When you finally kill that boss that's been killing you over and over again, it's a huge reward. When you finally get to the end of the game and you have conquered all of that stuff that everyone said was way too hard, you feel rewarded. But you'll also be super frustrated throughout the game. If you're anything like me, oh gosh, I was so angry at different points because I would just die. And it's not because of the game being too difficult, it's because me not being good enough, right? There was even a few times where I just rage quit, like Analondo. It took me like, I think it was 2 days, 3 days to get through that, and I would play for like an hour or 2 hours of these days, and I would just rage quit because it was so annoying. But I'm glad that I finished it. I'm glad that this is one of the games that I platinumed as well, because now I can boast about it, because it is such an amazing experience. The world is so good, even if the controls are a little bit heavy and clunky at times. They're all consistent throughout the game, and it's easily doable. It can be done. Multiple people have finished this game. It is not the hardest game out there in the world, but it's definitely a difficult game, and I would recommend playing it. This game is also about to get a remastered version of it when I'm doing this episode. I think it comes out in like 2 or 3 days. Even on the Switch of all places, the Nintendo is getting Dark Souls, so now you can die on the go. That is amazing. I think that's really, really cool. With this game, it's updated the graphics and the textures and all that kinds of stuff. I don't know if it's changed any of the gameplay elements because it's not out at the time of this review, but I would say that it would probably be the best way to experience the game more than any other way. If you don't have a PS3, then definitely get it on the Switch so you can play it on the train or something. That's just baffles me. It's pretty cool. So go and check it out. And guys, don't forget to write down in the comments below, what did you think of Dark Souls? Is it as hard as everyone says it is, or did you find it really easy? What was the point that you rage quit in? Because I think that most people that played this game rage quit at one point or another. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!